And we're back, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, to another episode of Talking Tabletops. In this episode, I wanted to talk about different systems that I've run, what they bring to the table, and why it might be the system for you. This is going to be sort of a passing observation on 4 of my personal favorite systems. If you would like a deeper dive into any of them, or if I missed one that you really enjoy, let me know in the comments below. Starting out, we're going to go with the classic. Dungeons & Dragons has been the game since its debut back in 1974, featuring a robust class system, character building, and a strong community. You would be hard-pressed to dethrone the king of tabletop role-playing games. Featuring a wealth of editions, I'm personally fond of the 2014 edition, which is commonly referred to as 5e. Now, the newer 2024 rules are considered by Wizards of the Coast to be the same 5e or 5th edition, just updated, but purists have separated the 2 editions by referring to the latest edition as simply 2024. System strengths. As the system that brought collaboration to pen and paper, D&D prides itself on player expression, modularity, and a deep sense of customization. With a healthy set of books and reference material, you will never be found wanting for content. And if you have a particular need that isn't being scratched, someone, somewhere, has developed some homebrew content that will meet your needs. Just please, check with your dungeon master before getting too far ahead with your homebrew. Also, for newer viewers or people unfamiliar, homebrew is essentially custom or fan-created content or rules that change it up. Think about the difference between Starbucks and their recipes and then making your own home-brewed coffee. Another big strength for this system is its structure. Characters will select a race, sometimes a sub-race, their main class, and eventually a subclass. Each of these decisions will net passive and active abilities and bonuses, sometimes even drawbacks. So long as the player has a good idea for the sort of character they'd like to play, it can be very easy to put something together. Even multi-classing is a concept that allows you to take enough of several different classes to make your own unique experience. As a dungeon master, it's also very straightforward with how to find the rules, though this can lend towards a system weakness, but I'll touch on that in a moment. The books for this system are robust and offer value all by themselves. The bare minimum for any table is the big 3: the Player's Handbook, the Dungeon Master's Guide, and the Monster Manual. Normally, a player won't need to buy any of these. A prepared Dungeon Master would have them on hand, but for the ambitious, the Player's Handbook is really all a player needs. Now, you can also get a majority of the rules for free on Wizards of the Coast's own website and app, D&D Beyond. But this is a more pen and paper focused segment. Now, the Player's Handbook contains all of the base game rules and options allowed to a player. It contains races, classes, and subclasses, as well as weapons, spells, and equipment. Any and all manner of progression can be found in and aided by this book. The Dungeon Master's Guide provides the Dungeon Master with guidance, as implied by the name, and contains the full amount of rules for running the game, balancing encounters, and is full of several tables and charts to help the Dungeon Master with preparation for their sessions, as well as suggestions by the designers of the game for several different things. from story planning to dungeon engineering and world building. The monster manual is just that. It is a bestiary of sorts where a player or a dungeon master can take a look for information on all the different kinds of enemies the game has to offer. Statistics, lore, explanations of tactics and abilities. These monsters are what fill the titular dungeons with their titular dragons. Now, player options are all fine and good, but another area that really thrives in Dungeons & Dragons is that of character limitations. If you play as raw as possible, now, raw stands for rules as written, then you are going to run into several can't do that's. How many items are you attuned to? Does your race have specific weaknesses built in? Just how much can you subclass and multiclass before you can attempt everything, but you just don't excel at as much? One big lesson, and one that I think that I'll expand on in a future video, is to lean into your weaknesses just as much as your strengths. Speaking of weaknesses, the system does have weaknesses, and it's hard to find cracks in the armor that Wizards of the Coast has forged, but every system has strain. Every system can have hangups. Personally, I find that there is a real issue with scaling. As your players and characters grow, there's a ceiling that just gets shattered. And so, more and more needs to be thrown at the party all at once in order to keep things challenging and fun. It's sort of like becoming an alcoholic. You need more and more to get the same result, the same effect. Now, we should also mention that every character has a level 20 hard cap to your progression, if you're playing rules as written. Now, there is enough of a framework to continue with further levels, but going back to the larger scaling issue, you start to ask, what is the challenge to players of this scale? Speaking of, exploration and social encounters don't really get much support and are typically ruled to the DM to referee without much of the structure you would expect from the thorough combat rules. I mean, there are a handful of ways you can resolve social encounters. You have intimidation, persuasion, and deception. 3 types of roles, and the burden is on the DM to make those encounters seem dynamic and interesting rather than simply relying on a handful of checks and the dice to determine everything. In exploration, things are a little bit more structured, with terrain and traps, but very little for immersion. Now, a ranger's mechanical differences from a fighter or a druid is less obvious than a wizard and a warlock or a fighter and a blood hunter. However, these weaknesses, and it's very important for me to say this, these weaknesses can always be countered by collaboration between players and dungeon masters and creativity in the absence of structure. You sort of see this be called the rule of cool. When the system doesn't have the exact ruling that you need, even the Dungeon Master's Guide, even the Player's Handbook, state the rules are secondary to the table's fun. Now you need structure, but you also need to know when to bend. Pivoting over to system number 2 is the Storyteller System, featured prominently in the World of Darkness. Now, this is the first system that I ever tried, and it's, again, the Storyteller System, specifically as it is used in Vampire the Masquerade V5, or the 5th edition of the game by White Wolf. This system is very narrative heavy, and as such it can be lacking when it comes down to combat. It's almost the reverse of the formerly discussed issue with D&D. The Storyteller System is all narrative and social, with a big focus on resource management as well through the hunger system. Now, with hunger, you are constantly battling your need to be supernatural, and survive and be able to do your supernatural abilities, but you balance that against your need to feed on the blood of the living. Now, instead of stamina or mana points or power points or spell slots, you have your hunger. If you risk too much, you risk losing control of yourself. You risk a frenzy. This could hurt you, others, loved ones, and it could risk breaking the masquerade, which, in lore, is a death sentence. You do not want to be the subject of a blood hunt. Now, the narrative focus of the system is the strength of the system, and it tends to shine a harsh light on who you are, why you're suffering, much more than how much damage your sword can do, or in probably this case, your claws or your teeth. It isn't that type of a crunchy game, and those who have a history in role-playing and maybe even theater are most likely going to find the best experiences in this system. Now, whereas someone who is very combat-focused, who may, zone out during exposition or take a back seat in dialogue-heavy scenes, they may feel, or it may seem to them like there isn't very much for them to do. Which leads me to the system weaknesses. The tone is so specific. This is horror. This is monster horror. There can be moments of light, even in the world of darkness, but it is very hard to run a lighthearted game, and if you avoid the tragedy, the system sort of rebels against you. You are a monster. You will hurt people. There are ways that you can be tragic about it, or even try to fight your nature, but it is that friction in which the story is found, and the system is called the Storyteller System. You're going to need to be narrative. If not, there are other systems for you. Now, the resource management heavy aspects of this system, specifically hunger and compulsions of the character builds, can sometimes cause a failure spiral, as if the system is punishing players for playing. However, an informed table who knows what sort of system they're getting themselves into normally sees these challenges as dynamic, as enhancements to the experience, more so than a punishment. For example, if Chains hasn't been able to feed in 3 days, he's not going to be able to call upon his Bruja strength in a moment that he needs it, because he also doesn't need to freak out and frenzy and then, flip a car that would definitely bring vampire hunters on his doorstep. So, he needs to rely on his regular strength. This might result in him getting severely injured and then needing to slink away. Now, he still can't risk that frenzy, but he needs to in order to heal. So he risks it. He heals a little bit, but he manages to frenzy. And then he goes and he gets himself hurt even worse. Or now he's being hunted by vampire hunters. And having to go through that can sometimes cause a spiral. Now, with a coterie, which is the system's form of the party, you are able to sort of cover each other's backs, but also due to the narrative issue of, being very in it for yourself, you may not be in a position where you can help your fellow table members. Now, that will depend on the character and the story, but if you look at the mythology of vampires and how they interact with each other, it's very seldom that you can trust another vampire, ever. System number 3 is going to be the Savage Worlds Adventure Edition. It's my personal, most hopeful system that I've kind of been playing around with. Hypermodular, and with several setting and genre-specific companions, Savage Worlds, made by Pinnacle Entertainment, is also known as SWADE. which stands for the Savage Worlds Adventure Edition. It is a phenomenal alternative to classic systems, and it focuses on the slogan pillars: fast, furious, fun. However, what is also evident is the amount of character building that is possible with this. Think of any movie, game, or book character or archetype, and I'm confident that with enough time and level ups, you can achieve it. From Aragorn from The Lord of the Rings, to John Wick from the world of John Wick, from Goku from Dragon Ball to Big Boss from Metal Gear Solid. Best of all, the core rules are contained in one book. It's about the size of a book you'd keep on a coffee table, and it's very portable, cheap when compared to some systems, and you are able to, right off the bat, run the entire package. You can tackle anything from the very basest line. Do you want a Western? Sure. What about a zombie apocalypse? Aliens versus Terminators? Cowboys versus aliens? Want to bring Inglourious Bastards to the table? You know they have stats for pirates, wizards, World War I through World War II, guns, vehicles, and soldiers, even superheroes. So let's talk about some system strengths. The sheer wingspan of this system is just incredible. In the core rules, you essentially get the keys to the castle, but in the companion pieces, you get specified rules for what you want when you want it. If you don't want it, don't use it. It is the utility belt of role-playing games. And I just want to shout out the main companion books really quick, and I don't even have all of them. I typically tend to go toward the companions rather than setting books, but I do have one setting book first. If you want anything with the Wild West, and maybe even some steampunk alternative history, this is also known as the Weird West. You've got Deadlands. This has your revolvers, your steam engines, jackalopes, and cowboys. For all your Western needs, from The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, which is very grounded, a classic spaghetti Western, to Tombstone and Hell on Wheels, which are a little bit more grounded, to Red Dead Redemption, or maybe even Undead Nightmare. For superhero goodness, which can range from inspired by Marvel to DC and graphic novels galore, you have the Superpower Companion. Finally, you get to answer the question, what superpower would you choose? For things that go bump in the night and playing monsters and victims, you've got to go with the Horror Companion. From Lovecraftian horror to maybe even Edgar Allan Poe, from Bram Stoker to Mary Shelley, maybe even Stephen King to Wes Craven. The Horror Companion wears its inspiration on its sleeve. You'll be able to battle, run from, embody, and experience all the aspects of the horror genre. For lovers of Star Wars, Star Trek, Fallout, and even maybe the Jetsons, if you like science fiction, then the Science Fiction Companion is for you. Science fiction is one of the most broad genres in fiction, and this book captures a lot of the subgenres very well. Maybe you're a fan of Cyberpunk 2077 or the Blade Runner movies. They have rules for cyberware. Want to go into hyperspace? Smuggle some spice? You better roll for it. Or maybe a leather-clad Mad Max style trip on the Fury Road is what you're feeling. Between the core rules and the Science Fiction Companion, you're covered. Now, probably the most impressive attempt at a companion, in my opinion, that Pinnacle went for was when they went for the King. I remember very vividly witnessing the fall of the Creative Commons license for Dungeons & Dragons. And Savage Worlds took on fantasy. The Fantasy Companion for Savage Worlds expands on the biggest draw for the tabletop role-playing game space, and it does it extremely well. However, it will lean into the weaknesses of the system, but I'm still bragging. To be able to adapt the formula made popular by sword and sorcery epics like Conan the Barbarian or Red Sonja, and the literary greats of The Lord of the Rings and Game of Thrones, you have all the components to create the characters you imagine. With a robust magic and power system that lets you define how your magic works, not simply casting Ogham's Firebolt of Cleansing at 5th level. Your magic specifically, learned or otherwise, is defined by you. It's not a pre-written spell. So, what about those weaknesses? SWADE is built with a character-first mentality. You'll define your ancestry or your race and some edges and hindrances, as well as your initial stats. By taking hindrances, you will be able to be better specialized as a character, and by design, you end up leaning into your weaknesses. Lost an eye? That's a major hindrance. Not only is it a character trait and a character flaw, but it will also provide you with a mechanical penalty. But maybe you're a one-eyed wizard, or you have a signature weapon. However, your character will only ever be as fleshed out as you are creative. Sure, you can look into a character build, but so much of this system is made unique about tailoring your experience to your vision. You can get the best combinations of bolt with maybe the magnified effect and fire trapping, with maybe a limited range modifier to make it cheaper to cast, but unless you tie the spell to the character, it'll be essentially flashy cardboard. Which might seem harsh, but what I mean is that one of the best things that I can say about the system is that it puts who you are and how you work as a character as seriously as it takes the combat system. It hits the balance that the Storyteller System just doesn't, and it has a much wider reach. It casts a wider net. However, the worst feeling I get from SWADE is essentially, oh, well, we have that at home. Now, don't get lost. Come back with me. In an attempt to be in every system, it inadvertently comes off as great value. You don't have beholders like in Dungeons and Dragons, you have observers. You don't have Jedi, you have the Star Knight. Sort of like the age-old Stallone-Schwarzenegger comparisons. I mean, Rambo is to Commando as the Jedi is to the Star Knight, or the Beholder is to the Observer, or as Dungeons and Dragons is to Savage Worlds' fantasy companion. There are merits to them both, and they're both good, but First Blood is a classic. The journey is what SWADE is all about, and it's easy to get lost in all the small parts that you never see the big picture. So when you go into Savage Worlds, you need to understand that what you're wanting to do is cut down on the prep and the bloat and get to the story. Some of the best mechanics come from SWADE, I think. Initiative doesn't lock you down for an hour, because initiative is dealt out with playing cards every single round. It keeps things fresh. Momentum. You have the robust character build system where you create character flaws and are encouraged to go with that. You get meta currency based on playing to your strengths and your weaknesses, being true to character. And the group rules for combat and dealing with minions is so much smoother than you would initially experience in something like Dungeons and Dragons, where every being has the same potential as everyone else. I mean, take a look at this example. If a level 1 fighter has 18 hit points and a wolf has 12 hit points, that is the same. In Savage Worlds, you have the difference between what is called an extra, or, the wolf, and a wild card. By being a wild card, which all players are, you are automatically considered more heroic than that of the common everyday rabble. Extras can only take 1 wound before being incapacitated. you can take 3. And that sets you apart. But it also has other mechanics like exploding dice. For example, if you roll the maximum value spot on a dice, like a d6 and you roll a 6, the dice explodes. You take that 6, you roll it again, and you see what you get. So if I roll a 6, it explodes, and then I roll a 3, that's a total of 9 damage. Now, there is no limit to when a dice stops exploding. So you get really, really dynamic, shocking moments when a goblin will just kill a player. It's rare, but it needs to be rare, but it can still happen. When it happens for a player, that turns into a really cool moment. That is the critical hit, not just a nat 20. The journey is what SWADE is all about. System number 4 will be the Star Wars RPG from Fantasy Flight Games, now Edge Studios. Arguably my favorite system of them all, and the one I hit my stride with, the Fantasy Flight Games system is a take on the Star Wars RPG, and this iteration is by far a love letter to the series. You can express several different types of Star Wars stories. The original Star Wars RPG leaned heavily into Wizards of the Coast's system for Dungeons & Dragons 3.5. Eventually we also got the D20 and Saga edition, but eventually the Fantasy Flight Games narrative dice system was introduced to the IP. But again, it is a love letter to the franchise. From the production value of the books to the approach to legends and new canon, this RPG has the flavor and lore with some truly unique mechanics that makes everything feel like Star Wars. This system, as far as the core rulebooks are concerned, is set roughly just after the destruction of the first Death Star in A New Hope. With this massive blow to the Empire, the entire galaxy shakes. From the edge of the Empire to usher in this new age of rebellion, all the while dealing with the Force and destiny. If you're a fan of the system, you know what I just did there. All of the lore in these core rulebooks is set within this time period. However, certain era sourcebooks can give different and new context, such as the Spark of Rebellion, which would happen anywhere between the fall of the Republic and the rise of the Empire, specifically with lore for Rebels and anything happening before Rogue One. This also, due to development, doesn't account for Andor because it hadn't been created yet. However, it is within that time period for the Spark of Rebellion. Rise of the Separatists is everything before the Phantom Menace, probably a good 15 years before the Phantom Menace, with all of the Trade Federation expansions in the Mid-Rim going into the Outer Rim, leading up until the Attack of the Clones, where the Clone Wars really starts, and then you get the first couple of years of the Clone Wars. The Clone Wars is a 3-year stint. About 1.5 years of content is covered in Rise of the Separatists. Collapse of the Republic is the last half of the war. This is the end of the Clone Wars series. This is the Revenge of the Sith and the immediate aftermath. I can get into those a little later or maybe in another episode, but there are also other sorts of books other than these era source books and the core rule books. These are location books, region books, adventure modules, and gear and stat compilation books such as Starships and Speeders, which is all about vehicles, Allies and Adversaries, which is about allies and adversaries, and then Gadgets and Gear, which can ease the burden of having to go through every book you own if you just need stats for anything. Coming back to the core rules, however, that's what's really cool about this system. Similar to Savage Worlds and Vampire the Masquerade, The same basic set of rules is all assembled in the core rulebook. The difference is, for this system, is that there are 3 of them, with specific thematic rules and flavors. These are the 3 core rulebooks: Edge of the Empire, Age of Rebellion, and Force and Destiny. Now, not all 3 are necessary to own, especially if your campaign doesn't fall within that specific theme. Let me explain. All 3 books handle character building, progression, and making your way through the galaxy through either combat, social, or traversal and exploration encounters. Each of the core rulebooks has the same sorts of chapters, just with subject matter differing slightly. So you get the Player's Guide, the Monster Manual, and the Dungeon Master's Guide all in one book. What differs is the theme. The themes of Star Wars are split into these 3 different categories to encompass the entirety of Star Wars as we know it. For Scum and Villainy, Frontier Justice, Exploration, and, to quote Ben Kenobi, Scum and Villainy, you have the first book in the system to come out, and the one that we're going to focus in on this section. It's called Edge of the Empire. So these are stories like The Mandalorian, The Book of Boba Fett, Solo, a Star Wars story, and they focus on the following careers. Now, a side tangent, careers are this system's version of classes, and each career has a specialization, about 6 of them, which feature like subclasses. The Edge of the Empire careers are Bounty Hunter, Colonist, Explorer, Hired Gun, Smuggler, and Technician. And each of those careers, like I said, has up to 6 specializations, 3 in the core rulebook for each career, and then each career has a career supplement, giving you another 3 specializations and career-specific gear, material, and vehicles. Each of these fills a different context within that archetype. A good way I consider what sort of character I would like to make is to assign popular characters to the careers and specializations. For example, Boba Fett and Jango Fett are most definitely bounty hunters. They're probably gadgeteers. Whereas a character like Zam Wessel is probably a bounty hunter assassin. Luke Skywalker, as he was in A New Hope, is actually closer to an explorer than a colonist. Whereas Uncle Owen and Aunt Beru would definitely be colonists. Han Solo was absolutely a smuggler. And Chewbacca and Black Karrsantan are likely hired guns, though in more traditional editions of the Star Wars RPG, like the Saga edition, Chewie is sometimes referred to as an explorer type by way of the scout specialization. Now, that is a lot, right? Well, good. As one of the most celebrated fictional worlds that we have, the galaxy far, far away needs this sort of a dedicated system. Now, we haven't touched on a big part of the system though. That's the narrative dice. Instead of a cut and dry pass or fail result, the system introduces a sort of sentence structure that goes along with the dice results. You can succeed and fail, yes, but you can also do these things with advantage or with threat. This normally sounds like this. You attempt the action. Do you succeed? Yes, and. That would be for a success with advantage. Well, yes, but that's a success with threat. No, and would be for a failure with threat. And then finally, no, but would be for a failure with advantage. So it's not just a constant spiral. I mean, you can certainly get into a spiral of failure with just failure with threat all over the place, but that is not always how it goes. So let me give you an example. I am in a shootout in the Mos Espa spaceport, and I want to try and hit a stormtrooper with my DL-44. For you Star Wars nerds, or for those of you who aren't, that is Han Solo's blaster. It's my favorite, and there are stats for it in the system. But anyway, I roll and I get a success with advantage. So I would then describe how I succeed and how something else good happens. And, by the way, I can do this as a player. I don't have to be the game master to provide the narration. So, I get the success with advantage. I'm going to say, well, I fire my DL-44 across the room and I score a hit on the stormtrooper's helmet. This causes a spray of sparks against his friend, who is also taking cover behind the barrel, giving him a threat dice to attack on his next turn. Now what that'll do is it'll make it a little bit harder for him to succeed. Narratively, this is because his friend just had his helmet hollowed by my DL-44, and the sparks went across his hands or his visor and it shook him up. This empowering of the player to provide narrative input can really help establish player buy-in. Now, I've been rambling for a while, but what other strengths are there? Well, for the sake of time, I'm not going to go too far into Age of Rebellion, which focuses all on military units, from the top command of brass to ace pilots, soldiers, politicians, and spies, so Andor, or Force and Destiny, which is all about the Force. But I will say this: no matter what you do, the Force is a central player in the narrative. Whether your character can use the Force or not, Destiny tokens are the meta currency of this system and are heavily encouraged to be used often. Players are almost always assumed to be aligned with the light side of the Force, whereas the Game Master operates with the dark side. However, fans of the Star Wars films and books and everything else know that there is a natural ebb and flow to the Force, and the Force affects all things. If a player uses a Destiny token, that light side point flows to the dark side, giving the Game Master another token they can use. This is vice versa for the Game Master. If the Game Master uses a dark side token, it is then given to the players as a light side token. This allows for the players and the Game Master to help curb the game in a mechanical way. And it's not metagaming, it's an act of the Force. Destiny, the whole space wizard thing. Now, I'm starting to ramble about the system for a while, so let's focus and talk about my main system strengths and weaknesses. My main system strength is that the character building process for this game is second to none, and it encourages player expression without gatekeeping content. There is no multi-classing because you only decide where you start. There is no reason that I couldn't begin as a colonist with the marshal specialization and then decide to turn in my badge for a bounty hunter license and take bounty hunter gadgeteer. Or maybe I'm the explorer fringer and I decide to take on a force sensitive universal specialization, which can be taken by any players, except for droids, and experience a force awakening. Well, what if I do the reverse and go from a Jedi Knight to a smuggler? These are all options you have access to at any time, so long as you have the experience points and the narrative to sustain it. So what's the weakness? What's my biggest gripe? Well, this is sort of a double whammy. Decision paralysis is probably the worst in this system, and becoming overpowered into a late game that doesn't really exist. Unlike Dungeons & Dragons, which is somewhat structured for a late game, Star Wars never really got to a solid concept of what late game should look like. The closest example we have is a concept called night level play, and even that is more like an optional start with more spending XP. However, when you can do everything, sometimes a character will end up trying to commit too far, too much, and become obscure and not very good at anything. There isn't much advice from the Game Master sections on this either, however, I maintain that this can be handled with creative players and Game Masters. However, eventually, if you do survive long enough and you get so much experience, you will get to a point where you are just simply too powerful to be challenged, at least in a one-on-one fight. If it has stats, you can kill it. If you let the players know that Darth Vader or Emperor Palpatine has a stat block, they will build the character that will kill him. Now, that's fine and good if you're doing a sort of break the canon campaign, which that could be its own episode by itself. That is so much fun. I did one with a dedicated group of players in Game of Thrones using the A Song of Ice and Fire RPG, and we didn't get out of Winterfell before Bran wasn't crippled. I can talk on that a little bit more later. But anyway, eventually you simply will be too powerful to be challenged. Now, numbers, I'm looking at you, Order 66, capital ship weapons, or secondary effects like blast or poison are effective still. But when you have a Sarisu Defender and a Makashi Duelist Master in the same character, it can be hard to hit someone with that specific skill set. All in all, the Star Wars RPG has a lot of love for the source material and a dedicated community that I post in the Reddit to this day, and a wealth of content to explore. Now, your mileage may vary though at a wider degree due to baked-in system friction. So, that is going to be the episode for today, ladies and gentlemen. If you liked the video, consider smacking that like button and leaving a comment. Do you agree with anything that I expressed? Do you disagree? Let's have a conversation down below. If you enjoy this sort of content, consider subscribing, as I am really enjoying this sort of a podcast platform to discuss the hobby. What topics should I cover next? Let me know. I hope you all are having a lovely day. Keep warm, stay hydrated, roll dice, and as always, keep telling stories.